And at that time, he was a tech director in Austin, Texas. I knew a little bit about him. So he goes up first, and the guy is so charismatic and so sharp, and it's got the audience so engaged, and I'm like, I don't want to follow this guy. I just don't. And he's just such a wonderful guy too, and so he's been involved with us in sort of various ways, in Keynote and done workshops and whatnot. So when we thought of this event, we just right away thought about Carl and bringing Carl here. So as I mentioned, he was a tech director at Eames County in Austin, Texas. He's written out 6 books on education technology, running a podcast.
2 podcasts.
Yeah, 2 podcasts now. Yep. Running 2 podcasts as well, and also a remote learning coach. I don't know how he does all these things and juggle all of these, but it's a personal and professional pleasure to introduce Carl.
Thank you, Tom. We're back. We are back. That was weird. The last 20 months, what happened? That was, yeah. I thank you, Tom, for making me follow you this time. That was good. We're going to talk a little bit about some different things, and this is going to be very interactive. I don't plan to just talk at you. I want you guys also to discuss things with each other, but this is going to be around the concept of learning realignment, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But as Tom mentioned, I do have some credentials. I'm not new to this game. I've been in education now. This is my 23rd year. Former classroom teacher, you'll see some pictures of that. Former tech director, former just about everything. I've tried it. DJ, podcast host, whatever. I'm actually coming out with a new book pretty soon called Ready, Set, Fail, which is about using failure and risk-taking to unlock creativity in the classroom, which is something I feel like we sometimes stifle. There'll actually be a session later today that I'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, I always like to start out with something poignant. So before we go forward, it's always good to look back, and I like this Teddy quote. And so I thought I'd go back a little bit into my history here. And, oh, that's a little too far back. What happened? Why is that? Oh my goodness, look at those jorts though. I mean, that should be my Halloween costume next year. No, I would never be allowed out in public. No, this is actually when I started teaching. Look at the, and by the way, if you can't see me, I'm right there. Look at the year, this is first grade. Look at the year at the bottom of this picture, 2001. Something else significant happened in our country in 2001. This was the year that 9/11 happened. How many of you were teaching when that happened? Yeah. Do you still remember that day like it was yesterday? A tragic event. There was a lot of trauma. Talking the next day, coming in and looking at the eyes of these 5- and 6-year-old kids and then trying to explain to them that not every building in the world was coming down because that's all they saw over and over again on the news. And I think about what's happened over the last 18, 20 months, and there's a lot of trauma still. It's a longer type of trauma, but we're still having kids coming back. How many of you are teaching, how many of you still have kids that are learning remotely? Any? Or are most of them back? All of them are back. Okay. When they came back, was it just like business as usual? Was there a little, it took a little while. It's like riding a bike. They got used to it, but it took a little while. This is me teaching. This is right before the pandemic. This is a group of 700 freshmen. Obviously, before the pandemic, we're all in a big giant auditorium with no masks on and sitting right next to each other. And this is, I think this particular day, I was asking them about TikTok. And I asked them, how many of you have TikTok accounts? And then their hands went up. This picture is actually 10 minutes later when I said, how many of you have checked your TikTok account since I've been talking? And that's how many, yes. Okay, well, at least you're honest about it. These are my 3 students who went to school at Hooker University. I know that sounds interesting. Don't know what the mascot would, never mind. My 3 little girls, all with the last name Hooker, so yes, please pray for them. As they enter middle school, it's going to be interesting. And they went to school last year. That's my house. Obviously, they were at home all year last year. And my youngest one, Caroline there, she, at the last day of school, you know, when everyone gets together and there's all the tears and the hugs and the goodbyes and all that, she just hit the leave meeting button. And I walked into her room, and she was in all-out tears. And I said, what's the matter? And she's like, this actually gives me tears thinking about it. But she says, I can't hug Miss Garcia. And I said, the teacher you've had all year that you've never physically met had that much impact on you. Miss Garcia is a 35-year tenured teacher, didn't know a lot with technology. I helped her with a little bit, but she just kept trying. But she still had that amazing ability to build a connection, so much so that my daughter, who'd never seen this person in her life, was crying on the last day of school. 2 days after the last day of school, we're in the pet store, and we hear a voice. Guess who it is? Miss Garcia. Come around the corner, we're like, and of course you have to ask, is it okay if I can hug, nowadays? But so she runs up, she says, of course, gives her a big old hug. And I was like, what an impact that has. Flash forward to, I know we just got over Halloween, so 28 days later, pretty scary movie, but I like to call it 587 days later because that was the longest spring break my kids have ever been on. Last week, my 2 youngest just went back to school. Last week, 587 days, my wife and I have been their teacher with virtual teachers, homeschooling, a little bit of everything. And I think about all those parents out there that have been struggling with this, but then teachers, of course, too, like it's a lot of disruption, right? We're just always having new kids come in. Where are they at? I mean, were they getting help or support at home? And it changes a lot. I also want to point out my daughter here, who in the background, my oldest daughter, continues a family tradition of what we call squatch bombing, where you have to look like a Sasquatch in the back of a photo. So I wasn't there for that picture, but I'm glad she did. So as we reflect a little bit about this time, yeah, learning looked a lot different. Obviously there's lots of different things that we were doing as kids, just to connect with our families, with the masks, trying to figure out ways to hear each other even was a struggle in a lot of ways. And I'll admit it, with my 3 kids, and you may have experienced this too, some kids actually excelled in this environment. Not all, not a lot, but a few did. We need to remember that because some of that needs to carry forward, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But honestly, a lot of them also struggled. And so when we get to our first interactive discussion here, I'm going to set you up for this. As we journey through the school year, we've learned now through the news that there's a new thing that we all have to be afraid of. And so I want you to watch this little clip, and then we're going to talk about it.
Shows the learning gap is continuing to widen because of remote education. Experts warn it has not only stunted students' core learning, but potentially their social and emotional learning for years to come.
Learning loss and what schools are doing to help is tonight to ABC 7 Extra.
School leaders hope that a box kit filled with school supplies and learning lessons will help solve this learning loss problem.
Just how much learning loss has his students suffered?
School districts are considering summer school to make up for COVID-related learning loss.
It's been almost a year since kids were forced out of the classroom because of the pandemic. And the longer they stay home, the more children are at risk of developing what's called COVID-19 learning loss.
It almost sounds like another disease, like they're going to develop this, right? Be careful. So here's what I want you to do. I'm not going to say anything. You can kind of guess probably where my angle is on this, but what I would like you to do for the next 2 minutes is, we've been sitting for a little bit, and I always like to get people to move. So what I would like you to do is stand up and find somebody around you and just have a conversation for 2 minutes. What are your thoughts on this phrase? What are your thoughts on the idea, the concept, goods, bads? Be honest, okay? We haven't seen each other in a long time, so let's have a nice little public discussion. So 2 minutes, go ahead, discuss your thoughts on learning loss.
loss is a nice alliterative term that is nice to use on the news, but there's so many other words they could have used instead.
Yes, I like that. Okay, 10 seconds. All right, thank you very much. Is anybody brave enough to share their thoughts, or maybe something that you guys brought up in your group discussion about this phrase? You want to share what their thoughts are on it? Nobody has an opinion on it. Wow. Okay.
There's actually been more, when we were talking about learning loss is more as a routine. So the routine and acceptable behavior. So things like that we feel have been lost.
More so than
Not necessarily the academics.
Right.
It's the routine and the what's accepted and the proper behaviors and
Social interactions.
social
Right.
interaction. Yeah.
Yes. If you've been online the last several years, you've probably seen a real lack of social interaction in some ways, right? What else? Yes. Oh, he's waving.
Oh, sorry.
And I called on him. I love it. He was waving across the room. I was like, yes, sir. You were raising your hand. Go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the comments I made was, I find it funny that the media is so focused on this learning stuff when we didn't have an option.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're so focused on, how did this affect the kids? Well, this affected everybody.
Right. And if it happens to everybody, and everybody's at that same level, did someone get ahead? Or are we all right? It is somewhat. And Susie said, what did we say, Susie? It's literate.
It's a nice alliterative term to use on the news.
A literate term, so it has a nice sound to it. The news likes to share it, but I think that a lot of times, did we lose stuff? I'm sure, yes. I mean, routines, and there's some social interaction. There's definitely some things that were lost. We always hear about the summer slide. That's always a big thing. But the reality is, when you come at it with that deficit thinking, then immediately, like you're saying, you teachers, this is your fault. You did this, and it's like, really, like we had no choice, right? But what can we do to recover from it? And I don't think it's positive. I don't think it's looking forward. And I think for me, this quote always means a lot to me. It's like, that's the reason why the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. You still need to look back and reflect on where you've been, and I think that's important. But we also need to think about what's most important, and that's where we're going forward. That's what we can control. We can't control what's happened to us in the past. The news can say stuff. We can hear all these things. Parents, I have some interesting parents at board meetings. We actually made it on CNN just a couple months ago. Not the way we wanted to. Down in Texas, I don't know if you've seen some of the interesting parents we've had show up. Yeah, it's been pretty interesting. Some of the books they've been reading out loud. Anyway, you'll have to watch those clips. But I do think that it's time for a new phrase. And so for me, I looked at lots of different ideas, like we don't want to call it that. And I've heard learning recovery. I've heard, this word came to my mind several times, realignment. And I went ahead and looked up the definition of it, and I love what it stands for. If you look up the literal definition of realignment, it is the position of changing or restoring something to a different or former state. Meaning, you've heard the phrase, let's get back to normal. Well, that's the same state. We need to get back to a different state. We need to change, we need to learn what we've done and then learn from what we've recovered or learned from and apply that going forward. And so I kind of break this down into a few different areas. And by the way, I'll give you guys these slides too. So I'll send a link at the end, you'll see it. But basically it comes down to these kind of 5 areas. And of course I got to stick with the automobile theme because now I'm going with realignment, so I'm going to stick with that. The first one, got to replace those spark plugs, right? And there we go, thank you. And that means a lot of different things. And for a lot of us, when the pandemic happened, it meant all of a sudden we had to replace and update and change everything we were doing to make it somewhat digital. Some of that was really good. Some of that not so good. I mean, taking a worksheet and making it digital is a change. I don't know if that's necessarily the best practice we want to do all the time. And I started thinking about outcomes, like what do we do in terms of our students, what they produce. And if you think about it, before 2000, there was the worksheet, there was the handwritten paper, right? Well, I guess in the late 90s, you started typing things up. I mean, there was typewriters and things like that. In the 2000s, all of a sudden, you could do a PowerPoint as your project. You could look up something on the interwebs. You remember, anyone know what that one's called right there? Yes, you're showing your age. Thank you for joining me. Oh, I miss Netscape. No. I don't. Word, I mean, you could type it up. And so now all of a sudden you could produce things in a different way. But really what's happening now in the future and going forward is there's all these other different ways that kids can create something that demonstrates that they understand the concept. It does not have to be just a paper. It doesn't have to be just a PowerPoint. I work with school districts across the country, and the number one thing all the teachers ask me is like, can I have them do something other than a Google slide this time? I'm like, yes, there are lots of different things they can do besides a Google slide to show the thing. I like Google Slides, but there's more things they can do. And this is just a few of the ideas, right? So how do we use that and create that going forward to give them a spark into their future? And I think that's important to think about. So as we think about their future, and the future of our kids, look at this video here, and someone tell me what's the biggest difference you see between the two videos? Robots, people. Yes, thank you. Literal color, black and white. There's always somebody in the crowd who points out. Yes, that's true though. That is a big difference. Now, I could back up a little bit, and you see there is actually somebody. What do you think that person's doing?
Inspection, maybe?
Inspecting it. They're hitting the on button. When it breaks, what do they do? Kick it and turn it off and off again. Yeah, exactly. That's how we fix all technology. But obviously, there's a level of automation that's happening here, and it's affecting what we're doing going forward. If you think about companies that no longer exist, you probably see some classics up there. Some of my favorites, Toys R Us, yes. Compaq, that was the type of computer I had in my first year of teaching 5th grade. We had those big, giant, and then we had those other ones that came in the cow boxes that were Gateway, yes, those are awesome too. But then you look in the last 40 years at all the companies that have just come about, and again, there's some crossover there. There's travel companies that are new, there's automobile companies that have changed, but you've got all these service and high-tech industries. We've heard of Pfizer recently in the news. Yeah. So again, this isn't about where getting the kids jobs in these companies. It's not about that. It's about where is their future going to land them. And if you look at, again, this isn't a sales talk. I'm not selling you a condo or a timeshare, but if you had 2 cents to rub together, I would invest them in these two areas because this actually affects education too. So robotics, think about this. 10 years ago, I walk into a school, an elementary school, I would have never seen a robot. Now, what do you got? Ozobots, Spheros, all of these little things rolling around, right? Now, the one on the left is a little more interesting. Artificial intelligence. How many of you have some sort of AI in your house, like an Alexa or a Google Home that's listening to every single thing you do? Awesome, I do too. I don't mind that she pays attention. She doesn't hear me anyway because she can never understand what I'm asking her. But there's some level of artificial intelligence. That too is going to affect schools. It's starting to affect it now, but just like robotics does today, in about 5 or 10 years, you're going to have this AI everywhere. So how does that affect what we teach and how we teach, right? Knowledge-based stuff, lower level DOK, that kind of stuff needs to kind of be, you can still teach it, but it needs to be integrated with the AI. We need to talk more about the concepts and the experiences. Now, this is a professor down in my neck of the woods in Rice University, and he has this prediction. And so he thinks that in 30 years, 50% of jobs will be automated. Now, pessimist looks at that and goes, well, that means there's not going to be a lot of work. Optimist goes, that means there's going to be probably different jobs that are coming about, right? Different jobs that make us different than the robots. I was in Seattle right before the pandemic, and I got to go to one of these stores. Have you guys been to one of these? These are crazy. There's actually one in one of the airports, too, an Amazon Go store, where you walk in, you swipe your phone, you go up to a thing, and you pick something off a shelf, and then you walk right out. And it registers on your Amazon card on your phone. And so, of course, me being the person I am, I went in there and changed a bunch of stuff and moved things around on the shelves. And I looked at my Amazon cart, and it was like $328 worth of stuff. I was like, but luckily it didn't charge me until I crossed the threshold. And so I had to move stuff back. And then someone did show up, by the way. A person came out of like a room and said, what are you doing? And I was like, where did you come from? I knew there was a person here. So that level of automation is interesting. Like this last 587 days, I'll be honest, at least one day I said, Alexa, homeschool the children, please. So my question for you is this. If 50% of jobs are going to be automated, I want you guys to share with me, someone think about what are some traits we need to be teaching our kids to make them different than robots? Because obviously, we can't be training them for these jobs that robots are going to take. What are some skills that are not robotic? Well, yes?
was going to say coding.
Coding would be good, programming the robots. But what else makes us different than robots? Humans. What's that? What's that? Problem solving. Yes. Sorry, it's like, yes, I can hear you. Creativity, right? Yes. Collaboration, all of those skills that make us human are the ones we have to kind of be focusing on. And what's interesting is there's a couple different things that have come about as a result of this. One is there's now a website out that's called willrobotstakemyjob.com. This is a real website. And it's a real website. I'm not making this up. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type in the word teacher. And what it does is it predicts in 20 years the percentage likelihood that your job will be replaced by a robot. Now, in the room, tell me, what do you think the number is going to be? What percentage likelihood in 20 years will be replaced by robots? 55? 80. Woo! 12%. 30%. Okay. You guys are all off. Let's type it in and see what happens. It's 90? Ooh. Teachers, 0.95. Totally safe. We're all okay. So we're raising our kids to just become teachers because that's the only job. No, there's lots of other jobs too. By the way, administrators, 0.46%. So we'll be around a lot longer than teachers. Sorry if you're a teacher. They tried this, by the way, in Japan. You know that, right? Like a few years ago, they tried to have a robot teach kids, and they tied up. By the end of the day, the robot was tied up, and the kids were running around the room going crazy. What jobs, though, do you think that if we did type in here would say a high percentage likelihood that they would be replaced by a robot? Truck driver. 80% chance that in 20 years, you'll be driving up the freeway over here, and there'll be a giant tractor trailer with no one driving it next to you. Isn't that exciting? And scary? What did you say? Manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing, automated things, tellers, obviously bank tellers, legal assistants, lawyers. I don't know if I'm too sad about that. No, travel agents. Anybody use travel agents? There is still a niche industry with that. It's going to stick around, but most of that's been automated now, right? So we have to think about these automated jobs. And the World Economic Forum met in 2015 to come up with their list of skills that they felt were most important for students entering the workforce. And when they met in 2020, right before the pandemic, they laid out their list of what the 2020 ones were. And it's interesting because some of these pretty much stayed the same. Critical thinking, working with people, but look what moved up. Creativity jumped up the list because we said, you know what, we have to be different than the robots. Some of these things moved around, but then things like emotional intelligence, empathy, moved up on the list. Again, something a robot can't do. Cognitive flexibility, which means when something gets in your way, what are you going to do? Are you going to fall down and just quit? Or are you going to try? You're going to have grit and resilience, right? With our kids, and I don't know if you experience this in your schools, but in my school district, a lot of kids have never been allowed to fail. So when they go off to college for the first time and mess up, they look around like, who's here to help me? No, you're on your own now. You have to give them that opportunity to fail a little bit in schools. Now, they just met 2 months ago, the same group, and they laid out their predictions for 2025. So let me move everything back over. And only a few things stayed. Same ones, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, still in the top 5. But they added a few other ones. Reasoning and ideation, resilience, again, kind of going back to that cognitive flexibility. A lot of tech now, tech use, tech design, tech monitoring, tech control. Leadership, social influence. Who would have ever thought influencing is a thing? It is a thing. It's a real profession. Active learning, and then analytical thinking and innovation, which is really a big kind of a catch-all idea of everything that we need to be teaching in our schools. Now, none of this is reading, writing, math, science, but you could argue that a lot of this is embedded in those subject areas, and if you teach it that way, you can actually build in, again, it goes back to the science and the art of teaching, you can build in these traits in your classroom. And so we need to be thinking about how are we emboldening our kids to do these things. Maybe not necessarily social influence, but there could be some of that, sure. Or even talking about the effect of social influence. I mean, I'm sure, how many of you have kids that are over the age of 12? Or been around them or borrowed one before? Okay, I don't know. My 12-year-old daughter is obsessed with this SS Sniper Wolf, which is a YouTube person who basically sits half screen and watches a video over here while she reacts to the video. Millions of followers. She's, Dad, she makes millions of dollars a week. And I'm like, that's crazy. You should do that. No. it's interesting. You have to think like why, and then so then we have the discussion. Why do you think she's making so much money? What is it that she's doing that's getting? Well, Dad, the clips are really quick, and she says funny things, and she looks a certain way. And I was like, it's interesting, right? She's presenting herself as a brand to you, and you're kind of accepting the brand. So do millions of others. So again, talking about these things with our kids is going to be of utmost importance going forward, because in 2025, again, this is a prediction. And a lot of this was changed because of the pandemic too, but a lot of it obviously is digital, but it's also how do you interact digitally. So a few other things. Oh yeah, got to make sure we check that battery. This is important. And I think a lot of our teachers and a lot of us have been on this low energy level. The fact that you guys are all here is first of all amazing. First of all, we want to be in person and have these events again. But I think our capacity and a lot of teacher capacity, I've been working with schools the last couple of years during this, you could see it in their eyes. They're like, we are spent. We can't go anymore. We are on empty. And we started the school year on empty, which is not a good thing. We did not get a chance to recharge. So what I want you to do now is just for 1 minute at your table this time, discuss just with your group, what's something you do to recharge your batteries or something you've done with your staff to help them recharge their batteries. Ready? 1 minute, go. Let's have, that was quick, that was a quick minute. Anybody willing to share something you're doing or something you do to recharge your batteries? Besides drinking, which is always an option, but I mean, has some long-term effects. Yes, yeah.
I started turning off my phone on the weekends.
Turning off, disconnecting. Anyone else doing that? A period of time where they disconnect, maybe at night or on a weekend or time period of the day? Okay, a lot of head nods, good one, yeah. My superintendent at one point set a rule that said teachers are not to be expected to check email between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. And send that out to parents and actually support that is a huge thing because parents will send an email at 10 expecting you to answer it at 10:01, right? In fact, they'll even, if they have your number, they'll text you, they'll Facebook DM you, hey, did you see the email I sent? Which is crazy. What else? Another thing. What other things do you do to recharge? Yes?
So I do photography and it gets me out walking.
Exercise, walking, getting out in nature. Anyone doing that to recharge? Okay, awesome, good. Anything else? Beach. Go Birds. Sorry, I just realized where I'm at. This is Boston, right? Never mind, I won't say that out loud. I'm an Eagles fan. What about reading books? Anyone reading books? Like not necessarily professional books. I mean, those are great, and I have some, but yeah, non-professional books, awesome. Unprofessional, I wouldn't, that sounds, hey, you know, some interesting novels out there you might find at the dime store. Podcasts, anyone doing podcasts as a reflection? Some educational, some just for fun? Yeah. Lots of different things, again, to recharge those energy level. And then our staff also, of course, if you work with staff, is anyone doing anything for their staff to help with this? Are you giving them the gift of time? Yes? What are you doing?
For collaboration purposes, we get subs.
Subs, I love that. We used to, one of the things we did is I would always substitute. I still do this, by the way, even though I'm not in the school district anymore. I sub my daughter's teachers now that they're in school. I sub for them, try to sub for them once a month for a couple hours. I just say, go to Starbucks. Go take an adult lunch, more than 20 minutes. You know how they go and drop the kids off and come back. And so giving them that gift of time, allowing them the time to collaborate during the school day, not just after school, is an important part of that. I do think if you are a leader and you have some effect on this, we obviously need to reassess our current goals. One thing that always frustrated me was we had a couple different superintendents come through our organization, and like the one would come in and like, all right, our goal for this year is creativity. And we're like, awesome, great, creativity. Then the next year, our goal for this year is collaboration. And then, okay. And then a new superintendent would come in, our goal for this year is creativity. And we're like, didn't we, you know, so you kind of just, it's every year there's a new goal, and at some point you have to reassess, but what I call strategic abandonment of certain things. We can't have 20 goals every year. We have to get rid of some of that. It's too much on our plates. Is there something as a result of the pandemic that you could probably now take off? There's probably a couple things like, well, that was important before this, but now it's not as important. Let's move it off the list for now until we need to bring it back, right? This is a hard thing. And some of you in the room have influence over this. Some of you, if you're a classroom teacher, are probably like, I can't control any of that. But if you are someone who's a building leader, an instructional leader, you have the ability to kind of pull some of these things off. So we think about that when we're talking about recharging batteries. It's not just about giving them breaks, but also pulling things off of our teachers' plates. What else are we doing? Oh, got to change the oil every now and then too, right? What does that look like? So the curricular load. This year, the last year and a half, it was amazing to me to see how much our kids could get through in a reduced capacity. I don't know if you guys experienced this, but a lot of our teachers said, okay, we're going to get to just the main things we need to get through because we don't have time to get through everything. And the kids were okay. We didn't do statewide assessments one year. The kids were okay. There's some people screaming, yay, yes. Maybe that's something we could change. Speaking of which, we do need to rethink how we do assessment. I'm going to do a session after this about assessment, so I won't get into it too deeply here, but I am a huge, huge fan of assessment. Not necessarily that kind of assessment, but I am a huge fan of what assessment can do for kids and for learning. And there's a lot of great research out here about the 3 kind of assessment types. You've probably heard of these. If you haven't, I'll just and in my session later, I'll go through these in more detail. But there's the assessment of learning, assessment for learning, which is really that formative assessment where the kid's learning as they go. And then the ultimate goal, which is where the kids are actually self-assessing, and it is now a part of their learning. So they're continually checking on themselves. They're not just going to you and saying, did I get it right or wrong? They're now checking on themselves, like, did I do this right? What can I do better? They're self-assessing, they're still reflecting. These are big goals for us when we think about assessment. How much of this is happening in schools? We do a ton of this one, a ton of assessment of learning. What do you know? We don't do a lot of the one on the right. It takes a little bit more work. And then we have 2 other things that have kind of been thrown into the mix recently. Now, this is not new, but these 2 terms, synchronous and asynchronous, have been around for decades, centuries even. But recently, of course, it's come to our forefront. So I think about this in terms of assessment. Traditional assessment is assessment of learning, and it's usually done in a synchronous environment. Every kid gets a test at the exact same time. Every kid takes it at the exact same time. Every kid turns it in at the exact same time. You could also have asynchronous assessment, projects, longer form things that actually help you with understanding more than just those knowledge-based concepts, where you have the kid up here who, of course, gets it done fast, and the one down here waits like 4 days before they get started on the project. Like, I'll get onto it when I get onto it. But again, it's a longer form type of assessment, and you can get a lot deeper with that kind of assessment. Now, you can't ask questions that you could find on Google, because they could look them up on that kind of assessment. And that's okay. It needs to be a deeper understanding. They need to demonstrate what they understand. Going back to those projects and all those ideas we shared about earlier. Student voice and feedback. Here's a couple of different examples. I think Rashawn, is Rashawn Richards here? Yeah, I think he's on his way. He's driving up from DC. He's creator of this, Explain Everything. Again, in Flipgrid, great ideas of ways to have kids actually demonstrate their understanding. And then as a teacher, you can go back in and see, all right, you just turned in this worksheet, but do I really know what you thought about it or how your process worked? No, now I can see a recording of it, and it'll teach me, like, okay, now I know what concept you're missing, what part of that you're missing. And then the ultimate for me, and I'll get into this again in the assessment session later, but tracking longitudinal improvement, we don't do a lot of in education, unfortunately. And I think it's because portfolios have taken a backseat to everything else. And that happens. Again, pandemic changes a lot of things. But I think if you think about ways to actually look at student growth over time, but not only you, but who needs to be looking at their growth over time? The students themselves need to be tracking, reflecting, Building in that time, even if it's 5 minutes on a Friday at the end of the day, hey guys, go into your WordPress, go into your Google site, go into your Bulb, and actually go in and actually write down, here's a couple things I learned, here's a couple things I still want to know. That practice is so important for them to internalize. It doesn't take a ton of time. You could do it on a Flipgrid, but it's harder to do it long form. You need to have it where you can see the growth over time. So again, a lot of what we do in terms of reflection happens on assignments. It doesn't happen necessarily with the kids long form, not in that longitudinal way. So again, we'll talk about that too. If you want to come to that session, I'm just trying to pimp that session, you can tell already. Funny that I use that word again too, Mr. Hooker. Anyway, sorry, my brain, guys, I haven't been around people in so long. I want to hug you all, but then you could all say you got hugged by a, never mind. So the ultimate assessment for me though is this, and this is the one that I've always said, when I was a teacher, this meant the most to me, and it's a simple math problem. It's how fast are the kids running to your class versus how fast are they running away from your class? That's the ultimate assessment, right? How much are you engaging them? It's not about being their friend either. I'm talking about, are you engaging them? Are you getting them? Are they excited to come to your class and learn? Because if they're not, it's going to be really hard for them to learn. It's just a part of their psychology. I mean, it's one of those needs. I mean, do they actually want to learn what you're teaching them or come to your class and actually learn from you? So I think that's an important part of it too. All right, a couple more things and we'll wrap this up. What are we doing next? Oh, the air filters. Well, of course we need to change our air filters. I'll turn that off because it's kind of annoying. But here I'm not talking about filters in general, and I'm not talking about internet filters either. I mean, we need to have those in place for a reason. What I'm talking about more is like, how do we change up our environment to make it more adaptive for different kids? How many of you have some sort of flexible seating? Okay, what does it look like?
All collaborative table spaces, stools, everything's on wheels.
Okay, so different.
All different.
Good.
Yeah.
Some people say, well, I've got rolling desks. And I'm like, well, that's, if every desk is a rolling desk, it's not really different. It's all the same. So having different is good. Having opportunities for individual time and group time, standing, sitting. I always say the most flexible learning environment doesn't cost a penny. It's outside. You can just take the kids outside. They can play red light, green light outside, right? It's not a... Some of you will get that reference. Some of you explain it to your neighbors, but yes, don't. No, and when I think about staff development, it's the same way. One of the best staff developments I ever did for my staff is we got a bus and it pulled up in front of where we usually do our professional learning. And I said, they're like, what are we doing? I was like, get on the bus, wear comfortable shoes, that's the only rule. And we went to places of business and actually did a PD. This is a teacher actually teaching our other teachers about Nearpod in a business that was downtown Austin. And the teachers came back and they're like, it was so different to not have to sit in those wooden library chairs and listen to PD all day. Something about being in a different space put them in a different headspace. So think about that too. When you're doing professional learning, it doesn't have to always be in that one room in your school that you have to. Sometimes you have no other choice, but if you can, get them out of that space. Movement is also a big part of that. You notice I made you guys stand up earlier. I think you can gauge and understand kids' interests in lots of different ways, but you also need to keep them moving. I share this slide pretty much at every presentation I do. And what it basically comes down to is research shows that, and now I said research shows, so you can't look it up. I've already said it. So don't even look up the research, because that's another thing that gets me when people say, oh, the research said it, whoever that is. No, but there is research that shows that if you, the average age of a kid is about how many minutes they can go without a transition. Any of you work with 5-year-olds, kindergartners? How many minutes you got? You got about 5 minutes. And you know this, if you're doing this thing where you're like, okay, kids, sit right here, and I'm gonna, and 5 minutes later, you're like, where did they all go? You know, they're up the walls, picking their noses, bleeding somehow randomly. Lots of different things. And with adults, by the way, 18 to 20 minutes. That's about how much time you got before we lose you. And when I say transition, that doesn't mean get up and do a jumping jack. It means turn and talk, stand and talk, or what we're about to do right now, which is called sit and stand. And the way this is gonna work is I'm basically gonna show you two things on the screen. And if you like the one on the left, you're gonna stand up. You're not gonna say anything, be brave. If you like the one on the right, just stay seated. Simple enough. We're gonna do this pretty fast. So there's gonna be a lot of up, down, up, down. Some people are always like, I'm gonna squat, because I kinda like both of them. I'm like, well, if you wanna squat, but we're not doing that, but that's okay. All right, first one, you ready? Yeah, push back your chair a little bit. This is good, stretch out the legs a little bit. All right, we're gonna gauge your interest quickly on this. Now, if we had time and a big enough space, you could also do like left, right, where you have people run to one side of the room to the other, but for the purposes of the room, we're gonna stand, sit. So again, stand on the left. Mountains, right, beach. Which is you? Which do you prefer? Oh, there's a squatter. Okay, stay there. Now, this one's a different one. Would you stand if you would if you would rather lose the ability to read. Sit if you would rather lose the ability to talk. A lot of you would lose the ability to talk. Okay, there's somebody, it's hard, right? You can't read if you're standing, but you can talk. If you're sitting, you can never talk again, but you can read. Wow. This is usually everybody stands. I'm impressed. Okay, good. Which would you rather be? Spider-Man? Batman. Okay. Some of you are like, I don't care. Would you rather have more time, stand, or more money, sit? Every time I do this, my friends are like, oh, they're educators. They're probably all like sitting because they want more money. I was like, no, most of them like this. We want more time. We're not in it for the money. Would you rather learn how to surf or skateboard? Of course, you guys know how to surf because you're from Hawaii. So you can. Which pet would you rather have? Oh. Some of you are like laying on the floor, crawling under the table. Are you a coffee or a tea person? A lot of coffee. A lot of coffee in here. Pizza or tacos? Oh. Oh. Oops, I don't know how that got in there. Sorry. Wrong conference. Pac-Man or Donkey Kong? Couple more. Goonies or Stranger Things? Classic. Some of you are like, I don't care. I haven't seen either of them. A couple more left. Star Trek or Star Wars? Oh, wow. There's a bravely stand. You like jumped up. You're like, that was the one I was waiting for. And then the last one. Wow. Some people sitting, though. I'm very impressed. All right, give yourselves a hand. Good job, everybody. Yeah. So again, quickly creating ways to discover what the interests are in the room while also engaging in a little physical activity. Those are just some, again, if you have time in a classroom or in a professional development setting, I like to split the room in half. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you mountains? Are you beach? And again, quickly, and then at that point, you could actually create groups from that if you wanted to keep going, like say, oh, beach people, you get together and come up with this idea. Mountain people come up with this idea. So again, different ways of differentiating while also getting movement involved. And this whole concept of creating risk-taking and failure, again, a later session I'll do today, we'll talk a lot about the yes and versus yeah but. Are you guys familiar with this idea? This comes from improv, but you probably are, and I'll just tell you a quick bit of it. We'll actually do it today in our session later. But you probably have this person in your life, the person on the bottom, the yeah but. Do you have a yeah butter in your life? Yeah, but that'll never work. Yeah, but the Wi-Fi. Yeah, but technology. Yeah, but nothing. There's probably that person. Sometimes it may be you. I sometimes can be a yeah but person, depending. But this mentality of yes anding people, of saying like yes and I think we could try this, allows things to continue to grow. The yeah but is a roadblock that stops ideas and stops thinking a lot of times. So it's amazing how just changing a couple of words can do that. Yeah but is very passive aggressive. You could say no. I've had teachers say, well, don't I have to say no? At some point it's like, yes, absolutely. You just say no. But have you thought about this? All of a sudden it becomes positive, right? No, but have you thought about trying this? So again, the words matter. That's a big part of that risk-taking and failure culture that we're going to talk about. All right, last one. Whoa, yes. Balance and rotate those tires. So it's interesting what's happened as a result of the pandemic. A good friend of mine, Brett Salakis, who lives in Australia, had an interesting thing happen during the pandemic. He said what was interesting in Australia was 90-something% of their goods comes from one place. Where all their goods come from? China. And he said what was interesting is when that pipeline got cut, all of a sudden they realized they relied heavily on a single model of delivery from China for most of their supplies. They needed to diversify where they're getting their goods. He said education is very much the same way. Before the pandemic, we relied heavily on one kind of version of instruction, which was what I'm doing to you right now, standing, talking in a synchronous environment. But what's happened as a result is we've changed some things, right? So pre-2020, in person, very scheduled. What could it be going forward? Flexible, there could be choice, there could be online. I'm thinking about my daughter who wants to take Italian in 7th grade. They don't have it in her middle school, but the one across town does. And when I talked to administrators, like, yeah, we can get a bus and figure out a way. And I was like, why are you just take her into that lab and have her record the teacher and just have her be a part of it. And then I started thinking, why does the teacher have to be in the same city, the same state, the same country? Well, country, you have to worry about time zones a little bit. And why does it have to be synchronous? Can they learn online? Some kids learn better different ways. So again, all of these different names, different words you've heard about a lot in the last couple of years. How is your school adapting to this? Are you going to go back to just, okay, we're going to go back to this one, in-person scheduled, and that's it? Or are you going to allow for a little bit of this? Are you starting to consider, like, maybe we need to add a blended component? Maybe we needed to add a 0 hour. I've heard some high schools doing where it's like you can come in late, but take one course online to make it a little more flexible. Again, these aren't new concepts. This is before the pandemic too, but now I think it should be front and center in our minds. So for the last little bit, I'm actually going to skip this one because I want to make sure we have time to give you guys time to get to the sessions and everything. I want to talk about this real quick. This idea of a learner-centered learning cycle. And it's what we do well in education is this top bubble. We teach new knowledge and skills really well. That's great. The next one, we try to do really well. We try to give them authentic application. So it's not just, Jane goes to the store to buy these things. Like, actually, what would happen if you did this? Make it authentic. The next two we struggle with because we're facing what I call a time famine, which is what we just saw when you guys all stood up when we said time's what you want. We don't have time to give them time to actually coach, mentor, and give each other peer feedback. Maybe we do. We have to build it in. And then if we do have time for that, the one I struggled with, and I'll admit it, as a teacher, I failed my first few years as a teacher, is I never gave them time for reflection, which is a huge component of that learning cycle. It was like, guys, math concept, move. Now we're going to go to reading, move. Now we're going to go to writing, move. It was never stop. Hey, for 1 minute, what's something you learned today? Like giving them a time to reflect. Today, when you're going to the sessions, you're going to have some time in between or times during the session where if you can, take a minute, pause, reflect. What's one thing you learned? That's so important. As you're driving home today, think about that, just reflect on that. Every day when I go home at night with my kids and we lay down in bed with them, they're still little and they still want me to read books to them, we'll read books, but when I turn off the lights and I lay with them for a few minutes, we always say, what's something you learned today, what's something you could do better, and what's something you want to try to do tomorrow. It's just a practice in our house. It's just think about it the next day. Visualize what you want to do different. And it could be make your bed. Sometimes that's the goal every day, because then you accomplish at least one thing, right, that day. So again, this cycle is a tricky thing to do. During the assessment session, we'll actually try to do an activity with it, which will be kind of cool too. Last couple things. Obviously, blended, personalized sounds great, but how do we actually make it happen? There has to be some sort of online component. I mean, there needs to be the ability for kids to go out and seek information on their own time. So we need to allow for flexibility. We need to have that voice and choice, and I think that's an important part of it. And I think when we're looking at how we actually, and that voice and choice can be different. It could be you can choose what your topic is, or it could be you could choose what your outcome is. So instead of a PowerPoint, like I said earlier, maybe you're doing a stop motion video about what this is that you're trying to demonstrate. So some ownership of their own learning. So again, these are all the buttons, but we're almost at the end. And I thought it would be extremely disingenuous of me to say, you need to teach voice and choice, and then I don't give you any choice in what you're going to learn. So the ending of the keynote is a choose your own adventure. You have two choices of how you want me to end it. And here's the great thing. I recorded both of these endings. There's asynchronous versions of these available. So if you don't get the one that you want to hear, you can go back later and watch the asynchronous version, okay? Because again, we need to be thinking about how we change not only kids, but how do we teach adults? Andragogy is very different than pedagogy. You guys come with different baggage. Adults, you know that. How many of you train adults for a living? It's different. It's somewhat the same, but it's different. You don't talk to adults like kindergartners, right? Okay, so your choice today. You go left to lasso or right to robots. So in a second, I'm going to ask you to stand. Actually, we'll do it by sound. That'll be different. But with your mask, this will be really interesting. It'll be muddled. All right, so make a sound if you want to go left to lasso. Oh, clapping too? Okay. What about right to robots? Oh. I think it's left to lasso. It was close. All right, left to lasso. Here we go. Okay, so I showed you this picture earlier. I didn't tell you a couple other things about this photo. One is, there's a few kids in here I want to point out. Namely, this one kid right up here. That is Damien. Why do you name your kid Damien? I don't know, but Damien was that kid. You all had that kid that every day you walked outside your classroom door and were like, oh, he's here again today. Damien showed up every day for school because mom did not want Damien at home. And it's interesting because I've since connected with this kid. He's now 26. We're Facebook friends. But at the time, I almost wanted to tell him, like, I hated you when you were my student. But he never admit that. But we did this project at the end. It was a voice and choice project. It was at the end of first grade. We had about 6 weeks to go. And the second grade teachers, I was like going to start teaching them second grade concepts. And all the second grade teachers came down and said, don't teach them anything about second grade. We don't want them to get ahead. I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. But okay, we'll figure it out. So I said, here's what we're going to do, guys. We have 6 weeks to go. You've hit every objective we need. I want you to choose a topic that you're passionate about, and you're going to apply it to math, reading, science, everything. And I don't care what the topic is. And the kids were like, really? And so they picked different topics. One kid loved basketball. One kid loved horses, Harry Potter, tornadoes, insects, Star Wars, whatever. They picked out what their topic was. I get through 21 kids. I get to the 22nd kid, and it's Damien, and he's looking at me. And he's got this big grin on his face, and I'm like, oh, no. What is it? He's like, guess what my topic is? And I was like, what's your topic? He's like, I'm fascinated with the actress Rachel Weisz. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I love her. I'm obsessed with her. I love The Mummy, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, you can do it. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at her research. I want you to discover the history of where she came from. I want you to write her a letter. And he struggled at writing. I want you to write her a letter. I want you to do math problems based on all the things that she's done in characters and movies she's done. Talk about the science behind The Mummy, all of these things, and do it. And he was floored, first of all, that I said he could do it, because he was waiting for me to say no. I was like, no, go for it. Try it. So we get to the last day of school, and I give every kid a trinket. Like the one kid likes basketball, I give him a basketball. Harry Potter, I give him a little scarf. And I look at Damien, and he's the last kid, and he's smiling at me, and he's like, you don't got anything for me, do you? And I was like, actually, you know that letter you wrote? I sent it to her. What? I sent it to her publicist. And she wrote back and sent this picture, and it was an autographed picture in a frame to him. And the kid who I tried to make cry the entire school year started to just bawl his eyes out. And I was floored. And as the kids left, it was the last day of school, kids are leaving, he was still in the room, and it was really weird. And I said, what's up, Damien? He's like, I thought for sure, first of all, he's one of like many kids. He was like the last of like 7 children, so he's not heard much in his house. He's like, I'm just surprised you let me do this. And to this day, he still tells me, he's like, remember that time you let me? And I was like, I know, that was crazy. I probably would have gotten fired, but yes. One other thing. They took this picture and posted it on Facebook about 10 years ago. This is 2010. So this is they're all about 16 years old. And there's Damien, by the way. Damien, yes. I should probably blur out his name. I just realized. Don't look at that picture too long. But they talked about things, and it was interesting because it was never like the writing paper that I gave them or the math test I gave them. It was about when we went and read the book Harry Potter and then did an after-school field trip to see the movie to compare the two. When we turned the whole room into a jungle gym and basically made it a habitat. They talked, all of them brought up this fish, which was really weird. And I know 2 people in this room who know exactly what this fish is because it's the state fish of Hawaii. What is it? They got it. Yes. It is the humu humu nuku nuku apua'a. And the last day of school, I said, first graders, here's the thing. If you guys are really good, and I mean really good, and we did a whole thing on Hawaii that year because I'd gone and brought them all necklaces and stuff. And I said, if you're really good, on the last day of school, I'm going to give you a 21-letter spelling word on your spelling test. They're like, really? And I was like, yeah, but you have to be really good. And like, okay, we're really good. So I gave them this 21-letter word, and I sent it home on Monday, and then I get 3 parent phone calls, admittedly. And I was like, never mind, it's a bonus word. It's not going to count against their grade. Calm down. 22 kids go home and study it. 22 kids come back. How many of them got it right? 22 of them. They all got it right. They all remembered it. And what was interesting was it left a mark on them that I didn't really intend originally. This little girl here, Brooke, she babysits my kids now. She just graduated from college recently. In fact, this is what she looks like now. She's got a nose ring. I'm not too pleased with that, but whatever. Again, it's weird to see these kids. They still, like in my mind, she still looks like a 6-year-old, but now she's 25. Anyway. And she just graduated from college, like I mentioned. And so I gave her, what most people need from college. Like, here's an envelope with some money in it. Thanks, congratulations. And she wrote me a thank you note, and I'm reading it. And my wife looks at me. She's like, what's the matter? And I flipped the note over because it had a little arrow to the back. And I just start crying. And she's like, what is it? And I go, look at the back of this letter. My wife had no idea what it meant, but it said, thank you so much for everything. And P.S., I can still spell humu humu nuku nuku apa. It's all about those trust and connections, guys, and that's why I leave you with this quote from Ted Lasso, right? You have to find that love in their heart, make those connections. Like Ms. Garcia, I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, having those connections is still the most important thing. And I think with all the tech and all the changes and all the things that are happening in the future of our kids, we need to continue to think about empathy, SEL, those skills that transcend everything when it comes to that automation, robotics, and everything else. and think about that as you go forward. If you want to view the other story, it is at mrhook.it/path. I'll also put the slides up there if you want to hear about Right for Robots. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much.